Good evening, everybody. Good evening, friends. And welcome back to the next in the series of Trilogue 2047, Conversations on Nation Building. Imagining India at 100, that's what we will be in 2047. Where should we be? What should we be doing? What are we dreaming to become as a nation? There's one part of this country that's sort of driving to become a superpower. Another which is talking about the country with the highest demographic dividend. We're looking for a nation of happy people, people with abundance, people with sustainable livelihoods, intellectual creativity, physical comfort. So we are looking to move towards that. So there are lots of labels, and there are as many strategies or models that can help us get there. We could, for example, do our business as we've been doing, maybe just jigging up the pace a little bit here and there, maybe getting a few more corporates to do business in India. We'll probably get what we've been getting so far. We could also copy models of the industrialized developed nations, and we will get, as we are getting, the same kind of problems, the same results, probably multiplied many times over. We could piggyback on the current strategies of low carbon development, on some inclusive growth models that we have. This will help us in cranking up our engines a little bit. It will probably direct our development in a direction that we want to go, but it will probably be slow. It will not answer the many variables, the social and environmental concerns that we need to answer in an integrated manner. At the same time, we might find that human institutional infrastructure, capacities, political unwillingness, business and politician nexus, or the overflowing and underskilled population, these will become barriers like mountains, preventing us from going where we really want to go. We could, however, tunnel through this mountain, and tunnel through this mountain to bypass the barriers that seem to overwhelm us, to use, for example, the potential of IT to reach millions of people with social services. What do we learn from that for local governance processes or urban services for the poor? So these are some of the issues that we've been grappling with, which the earlier discussions in the Trilogue series have tried to address. Albeit, I would say in a conceptual level, at a conceptual level, they haven't really gone down to the real solutions. And every time we've discussed in the last 5 or 6 series sessions that we've had with very eminent speakers, we've been talking about the desperate need to decouple natural resources from the growth, from the speed at which we are growing, and we need to grow. The desperate need to bring people in the center of governance, the desperate need to build up human capacities and potential, to look at new metrics that define our development. So, and every discussion that we've had, we've said, okay, where are the real examples? So from moving on, we're really now moving on from what should be to what can be and how can it be, by looking at real examples, real solutions. So what we have today are 6 innovators, 6 people and institutions driven by a passion to do things differently, to tunnel through barriers, to bypass problems, to challenge what is existing, to not accept the institutional frameworks that we have as a given, but to build new, and to design environmental social benefits into businesses rather than them becoming CSR. So if you are looking at these issues, and there are many small cases, and the 6 in front of you are a sample of some of the most exciting work that we see across the country today. So ladies and gentlemen, join me in welcoming Chavi Rajawat. Chavi is Sarpanch of Village Soda in Rajasthan. She brought in partnerships of the village government and people with private sector to enhance participation, transparency, accountability, and development. Kalyan, Akipedi, I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Yeah. Kalyan is the founder of Proto Village, a very interesting concept that adopts 12 interlinked and interdependent metrics of adequacy that direct the development of an ideal and self-sustained village. So these are now new metrics that we are seeing. Bharati Chaturvedi, founder director Chintan, who designs partnerships between waste management services and urban residents with an aim to reduce ecological footprints and increase environmental justice. G.K. Bhat, Chairman Taru, that leads amongst other aspects the design of urban public services with a systems perspective covering institutional, financial, economic, social and technological issues. Chaitanya Nadkarny, he's a social investor, a member and a current president of Rang De, which is a very exciting initiative that is focused on reaching poor communities with microcredit crowdsourced from other social investors. And then we have Kriti Nagrath. She's an environmental lawyer with a passion for affordable eco-housing services. She is driven by a strong belief in the potential of the construction sector to enhance social benefits and reduce environmental impacts. So the format for today's discussion is slightly different from what we've been having so far, but it's rather simple. Our leading discussants will share their work, ideas, philosophies in a rapid fire 5 to 7 minutes each. So I'm going to request Chavi to start off first.
Namaskar, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for having me here. I shall get straight to the point. I've been a sarpanch in my village, which is called Soda. Feel free to forget my name. You can address me as Soda, because I think the reason that I am here is because of my village. And I love the name. I don't think you can possibly forget the name of the village. We are located 60 kilometers from Jaipur in Rajasthan, and I've been the sarpanch in the village for about 4.5 years now, elected in 2010. The first slide shows you the picture of my team, except to my extreme right is my grandfather, who's not part of the team, but this is the day that we were elected, and he came to bless us and share his experiences because he had been the sarpanch in the village 20 years before I got elected. But of course, he didn't share very much because he tells me that during his time, there really wasn't much of funding in the name of rural development. And things were very, very different, where one had to struggle, one had to network a lot. He thinks that things have changed, but sadly, I don't think they really have. Yes, on papers, we have a lot of funding, but how projects are sanctioned, how they're implemented and executed, it's a different story, which I think most of you who are working the grassroots would already know about. So what we did differently really was, and I believe that for our nation, or for any nation for that matter, what really is important to ensure that each and every individual has a voice. And while there is the concept of Gram Sabha, as again most of you perhaps know, Gram Sabhas are not really conducted as they ought to. And my Gram Sabha, the first Gram Sabha we conducted, took me nearly an hour to get the first person to come up to speak. So we had actually created this entire stage. We had a microphone, we had a recorder to create that excitement, and yet it took us that long. But once that first person came up, everything has been easy thereafter. And also they realized that not only would their voice be heard, but they are the ones who actually know what the solutions to the problems are. So the only input I usually have during these meetings is, fine, if this is the problem, you tell us what the solution is, and you tell us what's the best way to go about it. And then we will chase the government, bring you that project, provided it is sanctioned. And in the process, what I've noticed happens is that the minute the villagers speak about the possible solutions, there's also a sense of ownership. And I think for anything to be sustainable, that sense of ownership has to come in. So that is our first step. I'm not saying we've found the best examples or the best solutions to problems, to creating that ownership, to ensuring that people participate more proactively, but it has worked to a great extent. And the first thing we did, because in my area, being Rajasthan, of course, water is a huge issue, but more so in my village, we are only dependent on surface water, the rainwater, because all groundwater has been declared unsafe, even for the purpose of irrigation, owing to natural contamination. so much so that we have a very high percentage of Down syndrome because of the intake of contaminated water, which, as most of you would know, starts affecting the child when the child is in the mother's womb. And as you can see the photograph at the bottom, this was clicked on 10th of February 2010. And this is the dry bed of our main reservoir, going to show that usually by December end or max Jan, all our ponds run dry. So villagers actually have no choice but to drink the groundwater, which is, I repeat, contaminated. So we got the entire village together, and a lot of the elders said, you will not be able to get people to come together because they've not done Shramdan in decades. In the olden days, my grandfather had told me that each family was allotted an area of the reservoir where, as per the convenience, they would come and desilt that portion whenever they could. And that was the process by which they ensured that the reservoirs were desilted on a regular basis and could have the capacity to hold rainwater. So therefore, the Shramdan. And what was amazing was the fact that each and every family, even from the hamlets, participated in that. And through the community participation, again, during our Gram Sabha, one of the biggest issues in villages is encroachment, which even though there is a revenue department by the government, which is supposed to take stringent action, obviously does not. I think one of the biggest reasons, if it is all right to say, the biggest land mafia is through that very department, because patwaris in villages who handle the land records often end up getting into selling land more than actually getting rid of encroachments or protecting the common pasture lands. Anyhow, so what we did was we spoke about narrow lanes, and all I told the villagers was, think beyond, think at least 20 years hence from now. Today your kids may have two-wheelers, eventually they will graduate to four-wheelers, which means you need larger lanes. In addition to which, Lord forbid, if there's ever a need for an ambulance or a fire brigade, how is it going to come in? And that's all we had to say. And you will see in these pictures, a lot of people on their own accord came forward and broke down entire walls of their respective houses. Even if they're mud walls, there's a cost involved. There is labor involved. It is, at the end of the day, the wall of their own house. But they went to the extent of breaking those down to provide the required width, because of which we've been able to bring about certain infrastructure development. We also brought in the bank, helped needy in whichever way we possibly could. The focus, as I said, has been in getting the community involved. And again, I noticed that within the village, over many years, because I've been going there since I was born, that community spirit had sort of disintegrated. And of course, I don't blame them, because for them, it is survival to the fittest. If you don't even have basic amenities such as safe drinking water available, obviously you're going to think of your own need and that of your family, which means even if you have to cut corners or step onto other people's toes, it is all right. And therefore, to create that spirit, what we've done is we've had our own set of volunteers from within the village. We formed different groups of different age groups. We have a children's club, girls club, and adolescent children's club, women's club, farmers club, so on and so forth. And through that, we have initiated programs and used sports as a medium to get the kids to connect with each other. I also try and play with them whenever I can, and whenever I do, I also involve the elders who've never played a sport ever in their life. But I think it is one step forward in ensuring that the different generations connect and they start to have dialogues. Getting people into the village has been difficult. And if I may add here, I've been behind DA for a while, and I'm hoping you guys will come into my village and help us. Because I think without partnerships, getting work done is really very, very difficult. Our biggest challenges in villages essentially are lack of funds. Yes, the government has its funding. I hate to say it, the district that my village falls in has been declared as a backward district, and therefore we have what is called a backward regional grant fund. If we didn't have that, what little infrastructural development we've been able to do, we would not have been able to do, because NREGA in the entire district, a lot of projects had not been sanctioned. So how do you hold the system accountable? How do you ensure that the funds that rightfully belong to panchayats or to villages are granted and released in time to ensure that they benefit from those? So these are questions that I'm going to put forward to you, because I myself have not been able to find an answer yet. The other thing that I noticed is environment and respect for the environment, respect for nature. Again, it is a concept that hasn't been shared with villagers. Of course, the older generation understands the need for it, but nobody talks about it. Nobody talks about the impact or stuff that we talk about, the climate change and its impact across the globe. And as a result, we had, my village, in fact, was one of the greenest belt in the entire district when I was much younger, but now it's one of the driest. So what we're trying to do is, as and when a family constructs a toilet, we give them 2 saplings from our side, and they're allowed to plant it in their house or in their fields. Along with that, we're also trying to revive our pasture land. This is not the best photograph. We've tried to do deep ditch fencing. Unfortunately, it's through an NGO, but that has been shortlisted by the government. So as you can see, the depth of the ditch is not as deep as it ought to be. But it is to protect the pasture land, where we're going to plant about 25,000 saplings. What we've been able to do essentially has been through the focus on children and women. I believe to get work done and to have an impact and ensure that it is sustainable, it is important to know where not to waste your time. And what we have done is focused on kids, especially those aged 14 and below, and on women. Kids, because I feel it is important to inculcate a sense of responsibility and values amongst the children, so that when they grow up, they take ownership, they respect the area that they belong to, and women, as we know, are essentially inclusive, and therefore it is easier to have them participate because they're the ones who suffer inside of the house as well as outside. And a lot of what we've been able to do in my village has essentially been because of these 2 important groups in the village. How much time do I have?
You don't.
I don't. Okay, fine. What to do? There's always so much to say. But anyway, I'll just end with, I don't think there's any sense in running you through this because most of you know what the issues are. But one of my biggest projects in the village has been revival of the existing reservoir. Our largest reservoir covers an area of 100 acres. I was unable to raise funds for this. So eventually I turned to my friends and family, collected 20 lakhs from them, with which we were able to desilt 10 acres of the 100 acres, which is the only bit in the entire village which is able to conserve rainwater and hold it until the next monsoon. Now, as of now, we've also received support from Coke, and where you see the green spots, those actually are islands we created to ensure that we're able to provide safe haven to the migratory birds because they had stopped coming. And I'm happy to share that we now have our first flock of ducks, which arrived last year. So we've covered about 45 acres of the 100 acres, and I'm hoping we'll be able to do more to at least ensure that the basic amenities are provided. And through that, of course, a lot of other things have happened. But our key projects and key challenges or key issues that we wish to work on are those that are listed there. My main challenge, which I will leave you with, which I'm hoping some of you will help me find answers to, is funding. How do you make the system accountable and transparent? How do you find volunteers to come into remote villages such as mine? How do you make the best use of social media? I struggle with that because we don't have internet connectivity in the village, which is improving now, but I don't have the bandwidth to do everything on my own. And how do you motivate organizations such as DA and all of you seated here? How do I motivate people like you to come into villages such as mine and the neighboring villages so that we can benefit from your expertise? Because I think the 2 issues that villages really fall far behind, because of which is essentially, as I said earlier, lack of funding, lack of expertise, and lack of that little nudge, which I think each one of us needs, even in our personal spaces. How do we provide that to the bottom of the pyramid? Because unless and until the nation doesn't see a bottom-up approach, I think we're going to continue facing the same issues repeatedly for longer generations. I shall leave you with that. Q&A for later.
I quit my job in 2008, early 2008, and I, not knowing what else to do, but knowing certainly that was not something I wanted to spend my life doing, that is making a rich company richer. I quit my job and I traveled across the country, and looking back, that's been the best thing that I've done all my life. I traveled across the country for about 2.5 years on a shoestring budget. And when I say shoestring, it's not a Prada shoe, it's a Bata shoe. It was a pretty cheap journey that way. But in terms of learning, that's been immense. That's been huge. For example, I was never into social service or even volunteering till the time I did the journey. But the journey afforded me the opportunity to live and become friends with scores of families across the country that are living below the so-called poverty line or the so-called bottom of the pyramid, etc., etc. And living with them, and particularly living in the tribal belts, taught me a couple of things about the whole idea of poverty eradication, or the whole popular notion of poverty eradication. And the first thing that I learned is that for any natural system to degenerate, there are three things that need to happen. One is standardization, so the gradual killing of diversity. And the second thing is promotion of individualism over the collective. And the third thing is an obsession for perpetual growth, which is a logical as well as a mathematical impossibility. Now, I learned these living with the tribal people in some of the most remote and the so-called backward districts of India. And what I wanted to do was, I wanted to dig deep and understand the whole idea of poverty, but then I failed to understand it because all I got was the State of the World reports which talked about how many people lived below poverty lines and how many people lived at the bottom of the pyramid, how many people didn't have access to electricity or sanitation, blah, 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 blah. All statistics. And the kind of families that have been generous to me during my journey, I see them as dots on the plot, which I refuse to accept. And that led me to think about the whole relevance of these concepts of poverty line, for example. That's a unidimensional definition of something. And we are led to believe that if suddenly everybody on this planet were to become capable of spending $1.25 or whatever else that number is per day, the world will be a happier place. Well, I don't believe that. And the second thing is, people always talk about working on the bottom of the pyramid, but you know, it appears to me that we have accepted the structure of a pyramid already. We've already been defeated in that sense. So my idea is not to accept that we are in a pyramid, because no matter what you do and how much of it you do at the bottom of the pyramid, the bottom will always exist, because it's a bloody pyramid. You cannot take the bottom off it. So you know, the whole idea or the approach or the popular approaches towards poverty eradication seem to me to be extremely pointless. And on the other hand, if we just reverse the three factors that lead us to systemic degeneration, you know, 180 degrees, we get three beautiful things which we promote, which if we promote, we can create a state of abundance. From, let's say, standardization to diversity, promoting diversity of knowledge, of resources, of skills, of ideas, of dreams, aspirations, whatever. Second thing is, from individualism to a little more responsible way of looking at the collective, to be mindful of our responsibility to the collective and let that take prominence over our individual ambitions. And the third thing is, instead of obsession for growth, let's start falling in love with a steady state of prosperity, you know, a sense of community. Now, with these ideas in mind, I invited a bunch of people to help me with the research on what that state could be, what that desired state could be. Now, first things first, I was not interested in tinkering with a system which is called poverty. I didn't want to eradicate it. I'm not interested in it. What I was instead interested in was in creating a state of abundance. That language itself was a lot more empowering to me. It was a lot more inspiring. And with that in mind, and with these three things as essentials in the design, I invited a bunch of people to help me out with the research, and to my delight and surprise, about 40 people from 25 different countries participated in that research. And we co-evolved the concept of abundance, which was earlier called adequacy. And so we define abundance as a state in which a community employs ecologically sustainable means to earn control over most of the resources necessary and sufficient to fulfill all its basic needs of all its inhabitants. Inhabitants don't just include I mean, they're not exclusively humans. Inhabitants also include humans. Now, having that been defined and the design elements also structured, then it was a matter of getting the principles, a few principles, charted out. And we had 3 principles to go ahead with. The first and the foremost was our loyalty to the planet. So the first principle that we had was place. It's called P greater than P greater than P, place greater than people greater than penny. By place, I mean life in a particular place, life in all its forms, the soil, the air, and the water. And so that comes first, then people, then the money. And the second principle is that we'll have no reinvention at all. And the third principle is that we'll keep all the knowledge open. Whatever we do there, wherever we get it from, into that place, we'll have to keep it open for others to follow it. Because replication has to be as easy and as simple as the original work appears to be. Now, having done that, I initially once the concept was all in paper and in print, I decided to take one step further and started where I was. At that time, I was in Sundarbans when I was just finishing my journey. And I decided to start it right there. And but within 45 days of living with a fisherman, I realized that local culture is absolutely essential for you to understand and blend in, which was impossible for me because I wasn't even familiar with their language. So I decided to put my tail between the legs and come down to my home district, which is Anantapur in Andhra. And ever since, in 2010 was when I came back to my district. And I started living there in a particular village, which is a very, very remote village. It got its road in 2011. So in August 2010 is when I started working in that village. And the first 8 or 9 months I spent familiarizing myself with the ways of life in a village. Their seasons, what they grow and what they do. So just documenting and working with all the families. So I had this scheme. I work with one particular family each day, eat their meal on all 3 times if they had, and work with them on their farms or wherever they work. And at the end of the day, they had to answer a few questions that I posed. So having a business background, I created a profit and loss account template and I got it filled in by the family every night. So after 100 days, I had information of all the 100 families in the village. Most authentic data, because I guess it's very difficult for them to give me false data. I've worked with them the whole day. And once that was there, I identified one family which was about to migrate out of the village for lack of opportunities. And this family was making about 7,000 rupees per annum at that time, per annum. And I have this genetic disorder I was just sharing of talking a lot. So I went to the farmer and I told him that I'll change his life in a year's time if he gave me that amount of time. And I asked him to postpone that decision. And gratefully, for me, he did. He was kind enough to oblige. And I went to his farm, and it was not cultivable. Fortunately for him, his dad had dug up a borewell somewhere close by. But the land was a hillock, with lots of boulders and rocks and various other things. Now, I'd already spoken too much to him, promised a lot. Now, I had no way to turn my back at him. So I started working with him. So what I told him will take about 15 days to make cultivable. It took us 7 months with a bunch of crowbars and spades. No machines allowed, against the principle. So we just did it with our bare hands. Myself, the farmer, and his wife. 3 people for 7 months, day in, day out. And we got it cleared, and the land is cultivable now. And I began to put every bit of the concept into practice there in that small land holding of 2 acres, 2.5 acres. And this started in about mid of 2011. And now the family grows most of the food it eats, including the millets and the rice, and all the vegetables they consume come from the land. And they use less than 2% of water that their fellows in the village use. And they generate all of the electricity they use on the farm. They've got an eco-friendly shelter, which we built with 12,000 rupees. So no need for fundraising. And I guess that's when I started understanding that anything is possible. It's just the will that is required. And also the other thing that I just need 2 more minutes. so I can't help it. So the other thing that I realized was the irrelevance of scale. We live in this, on this pale blue dot, which is completely inconsequential. It's insignificant in the broader cosmos, and we talk about scale. And it doesn't matter whether you work with 1 family or 1 billion families; they're still negligible. And the whole idea is doing what makes you happy, and this is what made me happy. And I understood the irrelevance of scale, so I added one more principle to the list, and that was scale in, not scale up or scale down. It is scaling inwards. So all the work that I did on the land with the crowbars and spades changed something inside of me, no more than what it changed outside. So scaling inwards was one, and we set up a biogas plant there, first of the kind in that region, and immediately within a month, it was replicated by 500 families. You know, the NGO that helped us out with that it went mad with the number of requests. And so I understood that there is a huge amount of power in setting a great example. So scaling in actually works in terms of letting things scale out on their own. You don't have to do much work in terms of scaling up. And having realized that, and having worked with the family, and the family is now very close to being abundant. They meet most of their basic needs. And now we are taking the next big step, which is about starting a community, of being the change. I never understood what the great old man said meant when he said, "Be the change that you wish to see in the world." Now I'm beginning to understand it. We are starting an intentional community. We got the land. When I wrote the concept note for the intentional community, a lot of friends contributed money, and immediately we had about 12.5 acres of land. And now there are 8 villagers who are part of that community. They are my team, and we are the only team we have. And we are working on all the 9 dimensions of abundance, which are which go this way: food security, shelter. Food includes water, so food security, shelter, clothing, energy, trade, health, education, connectivity, ecological conservation, and disaster management. So we are gradually working on all of these, a few at a time. And this year our focus has been on food security, water conservation, shelter, energy, and connectivity. This, as I said, is a remote village, but there have been people who have visited here, and now in a month or so we'll have the entire village Wi-Fi enabled. And that is not to use Facebook, but that is basically to bring telemedicine and agri information into the village, so as to enable people a little more. So that's what. Thank you.
Manual on what to do with waste, and it's a very good manual. It's far better than what we've ever had before. But the really strange part is that the policy on what the policy is doesn't yet exist. So the manual is out, and the policy is being made, and I'm part of that committee that's making the policy. And we've had precisely one really proper meeting. And what struck me is that our sector of materials, and we don't really, a lot of people no longer think of it as waste. We're talking of materials efficiency. And I think a lot of that is kind of, some parts of it are racing so brilliantly ahead that other parts really get left behind. And sometimes I think it's almost a kind of headless chicken situation. I mean, I was thinking of Bangalore, where everyone thinks that it's a perfect example of waste management, and it's being quoted widely, and yet we're looking at continuous dumping of urban waste on villages. So basically, what we do at Chintan, as all of you know, India generates a whole amount of waste, and it has huge and serious impacts on the environment. Greenhouse gases certainly, but also water. Water is extremely is poisoned by the way they are handling our waste. And on the other hand, there are these 2 million marginalized people who are recycling waste. In fact, they are the key recyclers in this country, but working under very hazardous circumstances. And you know, even though I've written waste pickers, I do want to really talk about other actors such as waste traders, small traders, itinerant buyers who come and buy our beer bottles and newspapers from our house. And what Chintan really does is basically we say that we convert these jobs, we enable people who are currently working in very marginal conditions but offering a really important service, help them to upgrade, help them offer professional services and take care of waste. So then you're looking after the planet and you're looking after the poor, and as a result a lot of the waste generators get a service they can depend upon. And on the other hand, and I'll share with you our model. I'm doing this really fast because I want to come at the end and talk about a couple of things. And the way we say, when we talk about change, is that if you can first organize people and help them get their basic rights and their social security, because how do you just train up people to offer services and then tell them, let the police still abuse them and let the police catch every kabadi every time there's a robbery in the area. So you really have to fundamentally organize the informal sector. And really, Chintan is, the first thing we ever did was organizing. We spent a lot of time organizing, and I really am very invested in that. Now the waste pickers, the dealers, all of them have their registered association called Safai Sena. Then you'll do training, and there's all kinds of training. And then you look at secure livelihoods. That's really very complicated because the waste pickers and Safai Sena said, we don't want our children to be waste pickers, and these are naukris are very important. And so when you look at secure livelihoods, you do a range of advocacy. You'll say that, for example, even the plastic waste rules say that you have to include waste pickers in waste collection. Of course, we can talk later about how poorly a lot of these have been implemented and why. But just in terms of making that space available, at least in the policy framework. Second part of our work was much more experimental, which was about children, because a lot of children would show up to all our meetings and say, "Humko bhi iCard do." And on the other hand, their parents would say, "Isko nahi, isko kuch nahi, isko to school jana chahiye." But because of the huge illiteracy, in fact, the average adult has nearly zero levels of literacy amongst waste pickers in North India. It was very challenging to even put their children into school. It still is, despite RTE, right to education. So we worked with a bunch of partners, and it didn't quite work out. So we started our own, No Child in Trash program, and we worked subsequently till date with about 5,000 children. And they go through a course with us, which is really like a bridge course, and then they get into the NCD school, and you have to support them. And even then, the discrimination is phenomenal. Till now, teachers will say, "Tu to kabadi hai, tu jaake corner mein baith ja, pata nahi kya bimari dega dusron ko." And you see it repeated across East Delhi, across South Delhi, across other states. And we're working now in Srinagar. And while you don't have those kinds of issues there, there's still a lot of antagonism about the Danda Kaam. And finally, I'll leave this part out because I do want to talk of, I'll give you a couple of examples. This is a materials recovery facility that we run that employs a few hundred people. And what these women are doing, what's remarkable about that is, let me see, it's not, what you can clearly see is that they're sorting out a lot of waste. A lot of this waste comes from people who Chintan has contracts with, such as the Taj group of hotels, and so on and so forth. But what's interesting is if you look at what they're working on, it's a cement platform. So, we've tried a lot of our experiments over time. We tried, everyone talks about integrating waste pickers in the, on a kind of moving system, and they say, well, that's how it will work. But the waste pickers have constantly rejected it because you then have to stand when you have a system like that. They prefer to sit, that's number one. On the other hand, you can't allow, on the other hand, what do you do about the back, because the lower back gets, waist pickers have huge problems with the lower back. So we've got muras. Finally, that is what works. The simple mura that you get on the road that most of us have in our homes. And we got this platform, but it couldn't be the level of a table. On the other hand, how do you keep it clean? It's impossible because everything sticks to that cement. So we got this chadar. We tried different experiments. Don't have time, but everything failed obviously. But finally, these large chadars came up, and that is what finally worked after several failures. And all of it was driven by the women here and a couple of the other waste pickers. Look at the gloves. Now, all the municipalities talk of gloves. But when you wear gloves, you perspire, your hands itch, you can have latex allergy. If you wear, no matter what, if you wear any glove that's very thick, which prevents cuts, you can't then segregate the waste. And actually, you can segregate on the kind of waste that you and I produce 12 kinds of paper, and that is the low end. You know, a Tomkov will do that. A really bright Pomachawa sorter will do 56 kinds of plastic and almost 30 odd kinds of paper. But to do that, you have to be able to hold, it's a very tactile work. So what we said is, they said, look, the juice of the waste, you know, the wet waste and even other waste, that is the part that's actually quite contaminating. But then there's a problem with cuts. So under this, they wear a kind of woven cotton glove which absorbs the pasina, and then they wear a plastic so that they don't have to touch the wet waste. So this is just an example of one of the works we do. This is at the New Delhi railway station, where again a few hundred waste pickers collect waste from these trains. And ironically, I met someone yesterday. We take no money from the railway station because we've been able to just break even and pay for all of this. And it's completely run not by Chintan. Chintan's job is to get the data, produce the reports, and look at quality control. But I met someone very senior from the railways. He called me for a meeting yesterday, and he said, you know, we're not happy with you. And I said, why aren't you happy? And he said, because you're not paying us anything. And I said, well, you know, before us, you paid this vendor 1,10,000 rupees to do this work, right? And you had to throw him out for lack of working. And he said, that's all right. He was very bad. But you've taken this free space from us. Land is very valuable. I mean, the railways have all this land is rotting. So I said, well then, where should we compost? Because we also compost. I don't know how many of you read the Indian Express on Sunday, but there they were showing off about how much they compost and, you know, the revolution that will happen. And so I said, well, actually, you should pay us because there's no market for compost. It's very difficult to sell compost, and decentralized compost even more difficult. And if you look at the fertilizer order and you look at the other laws and policies and orders in place, large people, if you have a large composting plant, then you even can actually co-market your compost. But if you're doing it in a decentralized way, which is actually much better because you don't transport waste. How much time? Okay, you don't have to, you know, transport. You save that kind of greenhouse gas and resources, and you can actually build capacity. You don't need too much space because you can actually create those kinds of spaces at the ward level, at the zone level. But there is absolutely no way that you can sell it. And that's been the experience of people across, not everybody's experience. I do have people, I mean, I do have colleagues who've managed to sell to tea gardens, but by and large, there's been a lot of pessimism around it. And I was saying you should be buying all this compost, like please don't expect it for free. So I'm talking of the kind of contradictions. The other thing is this whole business of L1. Maybe I'll just leave all this out. L1 is the lowest, you know, in the tender, the person who's going to give you the service the cheapest. And we've always been saying if you want something that's sustainable to the planet and to people, this L1 nonsense has to go out of the window because people like us will never bid because we will never win. And why? Because waste pickers would like to pay themselves minimum wages. Waste pickers would like to do things in a way which is like a business so that the end, they not only meet their ends but they live properly. And in L1 you can't pay minimum wages of 8,200 rupees and so on and so forth. You can't pay yourself that much because somebody else will undercut you, and so on and so forth. And so really one of the things to take out of this trialogue is that we're really looking at the triple bottom line. We have to look at the mechanisms by which we enter into service provision in cities. And even till date, it's so hard to break this whole L1 mentality. So you don't really care what comes out of it. Somebody told me in a really senior organization the other day, you know, I don't care what happens to my electronic waste. The L1 has to be right. So how do you protect people? How do you protect the planet? I mean, the challenge of L1 really has to come out. And just because I think I've ended my time, I'm going to just end with that. And what I do want to say is that a lot of Chintan's scale-up work has been by being part of policy shift. We, since 2006, have really been actively either serving on policy change committees or just lobbying from the outside, because I don't see how else it can happen. And also it drives innovation, because when you have more policy changes, somebody else somewhere will start at a different level and kind of bring in their innovation to that. And also we've been doing a lot of cutting edge studies, and that feeds into a lot of our work. With GIZ, for example, we worked on end-of-life vehicles. It's quite extraordinary because people don't look at this, but vehicles advertised everywhere, and you don't, on the other hand, think of what will happen in the end. Your clutch plate has asbestos. And as a result, because GIZ said, okay, do this study, we did the first study, and the Central Pollution Control Board said, oh my God. And now it's really taken an interest, and between GIZ and the Central Pollution Control Board, they're going far ahead in looking at what to do with this kind of whole new waste stream that exists, and that's going to become a very big issue. So between L1, between this whole thing of the wrong kind of subsidies and the absence of subsidies that are actually important to fight climate change, and looking at new cutting edge issues, I think that's how you actually make, you kind of holistically try to change the whole materials efficiency world that people like Chintan and many, many other organizations work in. Thank you.
Saying so that I can have better water, we think, you know, somebody is giving me and I am consuming. Okay. So what we are trying to do is creating dreams. Floods can be controlled, increasing the respite time, that is early warning, how much this thing, and decreasing the response time, how fast we can do. And conjunctive water management, that's in Indore we are trying out, creating ownership over local water sources, changing land use to incorporate conjunctive water management principles. This is the biggest problem in planning. So if you are talking about 24 to 47, we have the bridges which you build for 80 or 60 years or something like that, but your decision time frame of a city planner stops at 20 years. And the city commissioner only stays 3 years. So why should he think about anything? So if you want to talk about future ready systems, you cannot do in the current planning systems. This is what we tried for Surat. How do we create scenarios of future? What will happen if different things happen? So two most important things came in: natural disasters and social cohesion. You'll be surprised that people, the city tells that social cohesion is going to be an issue. Most important. One is a flood, and then they said social cohesion. And we created 4 scenarios, and we said, where do you want to go? First, let us decide where do you want to go. How do we go? That's what is done there. Okay. What if you are approaching future? We have to think about a third 3 loop thing. Now it's all we think about is increase the capacity. Okay, water is not there. Get some more water. Where? From Yamuna, from the Ganga, then go to Renuka and all those things. Then we have to think about developing alternate sources. Third would be actually changing the major changes in policies. That's what we have to do. Okay. Then we can go from resilience to scarcity to resilience. So we learned following things. Capacity constraints exist, but creating common dreams is possible. Dreams can catalyze action. Planning is possible even in uncertain environments. There's so much uncertainty of money and things like that. Formalizing coping mechanisms can build a urban system resilience. Conservation ethic exists in most of the cities, but the only thing is, how do we really build on it? Private sectors have examples to replicate. 10 years back, nobody thought about RO coming into the house. Okay, now we have whatever quality water you can generate right in the house. That's what the private sector has done. The whole AquaGuard phenomenon, which I never thought it will work, but actually it works because they put in a beautiful service system. Then communicating and reinforcing messages are required. So I'll just leave it out. I think I've talked about it. Okay, one point I want to talk about, the whole, we are wasting our resources, whatever carbon neutral and things that we're talking about. Ultimately, can we conserve, can we recycle carbon within rural and urban systems as a unit, as a region? It is possible, because we generate so much waste as she was talking about. A lot of it actually can recycle. We need not. There's a beautiful story of calcium atom by Aldo Leopold. We should repeat it in a rural-urban continuum.
Okay, so what is the problem we're talking about? Massive numbers of people having no access to financial products, loans, as simple as a regular loan that can help them with their education, livelihoods, and so on. Systems have failed. Millions of people don't have bank accounts or inactive bank accounts. They still pay 50, 80, 100% per annum for a simple loan. And that's the problem that we are trying to solve at Rangde. What are we? Basically, we are India's first internet-based crowdfunding platform that connects people who want money, needy borrowers on one end, and people who have some spare cash that they can give as a loan. And this is not charity, it's a loan, it's an investment that comes back to the person who has lent it. And this is what we have done in the last 6 years. The two most important things, or maybe two most important numbers, 30,000 loans, 23 crores plus of loans given out, 6,400 individual people like you and me who have given small amounts of money, 100, 500,000, 5,000, whatever that they could do. What do you do as an investor on our Rangde or portfolio? You would go in on a website, look at who needs what kind of money for what, pick up how much you want to decide, how much you want to give, basically, and then make an investment. And you have a portfolio that our system actually allows you to monitor. So why do people come and use our platform? It's basically two things. One is the strong sense of empathy in most of us. We want to help. We have spare cash that we can give. You don't need deep pockets to give small amount of loans, and the desire to see impact. And this, what we have seen repeatedly is small loans have huge impact in the lives of poor people. In fact, so small that these are children from a government school in Pune who saved from their tiffin money, from the pocket money, and actually lent to people in Pune. And this was a picture from a visit that we organized where they went and met the people that they are given loans to. So we can make it as easy and as simple as that. Who are the people we are trying to reach out to? People who really been completely off the radar of even microfinance organizations. This is a community of people who actually used to steal barns from forests and make bamboo-based products. We've given them this. This is the second time that they're paying loans, and they don't have to do it anymore. They buy it from the open market and do it. We are keeping children in school. Massive aspirational value, and almost 30-40% of people's income is going into education. This girl on the left was a dropout. She wouldn't have come back to school had we not been able to give her a loan. She's a class topper today in one of the leading optometric colleges in Bangalore. So what are we doing? Is it just a loan? Is it something more that we can do? We can do a lot more. We're looking at ways in which money is not the only thing we can give, but we can also bring expertise, we can give market access, we can give advice to people. Just as money was a constraint, information is also a constraint. And that's something we're trying to do. There are plenty of challenges we're trying to solve. There are plenty of institutions which are failing because they don't have flexible products. They can't, this rickshaw owner cannot go and get a bank loan. We are going to make it happen for him. Which means that in a year's time, rather than rent a rickshaw, he's going to be an owner of a rickshaw that he's going to take care of, an asset owner. even established cooperatives, long-running ones, well-named ones, don't have access to working capital. This is a unit from Karnataka, a long-running that we have been raising funds that they use as working capital. Where is this money coming from? People like you and me giving small amounts of money. So that's basically what our target is. We believe that poverty persists because of indifference and exploitation. And there is a way that we can handle it. It's a multidimensional problem. We are a David fighting a Goliath, but access to credit remains a problem for millions of people. And I think you and I, with small things, can do wonders. That's the Rang's story.
Cement, another major input, is 300 million tons of limestone, 30 million tons of coal, and we can keep going on with steel, with lime, with wood. These numbers will keep escalating as our demand grows. So what do? We have an opportunity. We have a massive opportunity over here. We have 43 million households that have to be created, and beyond that, people will continue to need houses. So how do we have a system for sustainable and affordable housing for all? And we do this while staying within the planetary boundaries that we have. So we, as DA, have done a lot of work on providing housing to people. What happens when a person in the village decides to go build a house? He needs a couple of things. So you need money, you need someone to draw your designs, you need material, and you need someone to use the material to build your house. We're all familiar with these raw materials. What happens when I'm standing in the village and I want this house? I go to the bank and ask them for money. But I may not have adequate paperwork, or the bank just doesn't think I am worthy enough to be taking a risk on his money. So I don't get any money from the bank. There's definitely no concept of structural engineers or architects in the rural housing space. So that goes out of the window. Of course, there's brick available everywhere, there's cement available everywhere, and there are masons who will help you build your house. But this is where your chunk of your material intensity comes from your materials and the way you use it. So we're saying, let's go green, let's avoid this impact. If we're going green, that's not available again. So what do? With this framework, working on the field, talking to people, we've developed a model that is what I would like to share with you all today. So we have our rural client group, and the first thing that we decide to offer to them are financial services. But this is really tricky because banks are not happy to lend. Even with an NGO standing as a guarantor, they're really not happy to lend. So we developed a model, what we call Build Together, Pay Together, which is essentially a group of 8 to 10 people come together, form a joint liability group. They choose their own group members, so they're happy with whom they are. They get a loan together, they build together, they reach their milestones together, they get their tranches of the next installment together, and they've completed homes. What does this do from the bank's perspective? The risk reduces because they know as a group they'll get the money back. The efficiency in construction improves because you have 10 houses coming up together. Your repayment time goes down, your construction time goes down. So it's a win-win for both the consumer as well as for the bank. The second thing that we looked at were materials. You need material, you need brick, you need mortar, you need all of this to get your house up and together. If we're saying that these materials have to be eco-friendly, then you don't have supply chains. These materials, the green materials may not be available everywhere. So what we did was we created these enterprises that would give you your solutions. So you go to a spot and they'll have your roofing solution, your frames, your door window frames, your walls, your floors, everything. And not just that you get your materials, you also create employment in the bargain because you have people who are creating these materials and then selling them to you. Then we need to use this material, so you need to have construction services. What did we do for this? We brought together a group of masons, and Karigar is masons. So there's a masons guild that was created. So these are again 20 masons who come together. We've worked with them over the years to help build their skills. So they are now very, very proficient in eco-building skills. And then as a group, they get together, they employ other masons with them, or they collaborate with other masons, pass these skills on, and then they're constructing these eco-friendly homes. And finally, the technical support system which we provide, which would be your drawings, your plans, etc. So essentially, you have a complete model with your 4 components that you need to build a house that weren't there either individually or together. Now we help aggregate this entire system to make it come together. And what happens if this does take place, or what did we manage to do through getting this system in place? If we say that this is one cluster, This cluster deals with about 500 households per year. And then you have your carbon savings, you have soil saved, you have waste utilized, because you can move from cleaner material, you move from red bricks to fly ash bricks. You not just stop at your environmental benefits, but you actually have the local economy that gets strengthened, because you have 15 million worth of building material that's generated and then sold every year. You have livelihoods created, and you have your 500 households. We're a really large country, so one cluster is really not going to get you anywhere. There is a potential, if we were to say we have 40 million houses that need to be built, let's say we'll do it in the next 10 years. 8,000 of such clusters or such units can come up without, with very happily being productive, making profit, everyone being happy, and then you have all the benefits. So I'd like to leave you all with this.
Brilliant presentations. Go back to where you started around making systemic change, changing the system. How do you do that? You all presented, a lot of you presented very good models of development in different ways, but surely we have to bring in government, whether that's policy or whether that's through provision of services in a way that's more economic, or the private sector. In Soda there's a lot of social responsibility, but that's still, that can't be replicated because there's a limit on how much money there is. So how do you bring in the private sector? How do you bring in the government to take those innovations and really bring them to a scale?
Yeah, hi. My question is directed to Kalyan. I was very enamored by your talk. It was very interesting, the principles and everything. And especially your three factors leading to systemic degradation. I was just wondering, like specifically when you were talking about turning individualism on its head and talking about responsibility towards the collective, and then you talked about scaling in and doing what makes you happy. How do the two of them interact? Because I feel there's a potential for them to be contradictory in a way. And how would that like feed into your proto-village? Okay, I'll try and answer your question and try and answer it what way I possibly can as well. Yes, I do think that there's a lot of stuff going to your question that can be done locally. But what is required is, and as you may have noticed, I don't know how many of you observed, but each one who spoke today has spoken about the community spirit and getting people together to take responsibility. So if we're able to do that, a lot of stuff can be done without too much of input coming from outside. But yes, there is a certain element of expertise which is needed, which sadly nobody's willing. I won't say nobody, but there are very few people who are willing to go to villages and share that expertise and that knowledge for people to inculcate in their daily habits so that becomes sustainable. I hope that kind of answers your question. But I feel if that is done with a larger perspective, and I think education to a huge extent plays, again, a huge role in how things function. So if we really want a change at the grassroots, if we want change, a holistic change across the nation, then I think our education system needs to change in a big way. If you look at villages, including mine, the entire education system is so pathetic. It is, I'm sure a lot of you may have seen it. The sad part is the policymakers, who are the people who are making those policies? Who's keeping a check on what kind of teachers are becoming teachers? The people who are becoming teachers essentially just want a government job. They want pension. They don't really they're not really interested in teaching, and even if those who are interested in teaching, do they really know how to teach? Because what they have learned in their days in the rural sector, how good or bad that has been, is what really decides what they are going to teach as teachers to the next generation. So I feel that if we can bring in, and again, yes, there's, I think, a huge, when people speak of development, they're only looking at the West, because the West has also had a cycle that we are aspiring towards. So yes, it makes sense to ape them, but not completely, not blindly, because we have to look at what our diversity needs, we have to look at what our local needs really are, and look into what used to be good. For example, if we look at our education system and we were to inculcate or somehow incorporate our Gurukul system, which focuses both on bhautik and adhyatmik, that is spiritual and materialistic balance, and a holistic growth of an individual, what it inculcates is not just values, but also basic respect of one human being towards another human being, but also nature and animals. How do we incorporate that? How do we ensure that every individual in the society has that? And if we are able to bring that in, I think a lot of things can scale up, a lot of good can happen, the sustainability aspect can be brought into the picture. But of course, our policymakers, our leaders also have to ensure that they provide that platform, they provide voice to each and every individual, make each and every individual the key stakeholder. Again, I hate to say this, from what I have seen in the rural sector, even if it is a well-meaning individual coming in, it is a very top-down approach. Are you really talking to the individuals who are living there to understand, as Kalyan pointed out, it is important to understand what their needs are, what they aspire towards, and what solutions are they looking for, and how can you, with your expertise, making them the key stakeholders, provide that expertise to ensure that a holistic solution is brought in. I think we can do that. If we can do that basic exercise, things would be a lot easier. With your question, sir, about how the change of government has made a difference, at the end of the day, sadly, our system doesn't really function as an institution, as most of us know. It is totally dependent on the individual who's seated there. So if that individual has a vision and a drive and a will to bring about change, change will happen. If not, if there's complete apathy, and I've seen the previous government, which in my state and the center was the same, for 4.5 years, not very much happened in my district. I will not speak about other districts, but not much happened in my district. With the current change, I cannot speak about the government, but the bureaucratic change that has happened, I have met few individuals, senior bureaucrats in the state, who have the drive, who are young, who have the zeal to make a difference, and because of them, some things have changed. And I can say that personally because we've had a couple of projects which have been stalled because the revenue department manipulated data, and even though everybody knew that they're manipulating data, nobody had the guts enough or wanted to take the responsibility to question it. So with the new bureaucracy, some of that has happened, some things have fallen in place, not in the best way because I was recently attacked, but the thing is that somebody took an action. So it totally depends. I just wish there was a way of making the system accountable. If we could work with that, then irrespective of which government comes in and make our system accountable, things would fall in place. And I think somewhat answered your question. I'm sure others would want to chip in as well.
A private corporation with funds and the village community. What kind of win-win partnerships can we see here, and specifically from the perspective of the local government? Or, for example, the 12 or 9 indicators of abundance that we see, how do they start, or how can they get into planning boards so that we can start looking at rural development parameters and rural planning parameters in a different manner? Is there space?
I think if the 3 elements come together, there's huge potential, because there is the concept of an organized sector coming in. There is that management and professionalism that comes in with the private sector. Government has its policies, its funds, which can also be utilized. And the village, again, I will repeat myself, the key stakeholders are the villagers. Now, in my being where I am, I'd like to point out, my vision had been to play the role of a facilitator. Because for a company to have its staff member going into a village, there's a cost involved. There is a lot of work that needs to be done because you need to gain that confidence from the villagers, which takes time, as Kalyan also pointed out. So if you have people like Kalyan, me, and any of us who work in villages, I think if people can start taking advantage of it and not be as huge skeptics as many tend to be, I think a lot can happen by bridging those dots, by connecting those dots. And I just wish people would see that. And again, I would also like to just end by saying that not everything has to be philanthropic, because a lot of people think that villages will not pay, which is so not true. If they understand there is value, which is going to change their life, the life of the next generation, they are willing to pay. Yes, they may not be able to pay the way people with privileged backgrounds such as ours would, but they are willing to pay a smaller amount. So I think people need to see that, yes, the ROI may not be as instant, but it will be there if people are willing to wait it out, because the numbers are much larger. People wanting to see that change and having aspirations is much larger. They're willing to contribute, they're willing to chip in whatever they can, even if it means taking loans. They're willing to do it. But people have to be open to the idea, people have to be willing to take the courage, think a little out of the box, go to the grassroots, and join hands, form those partnerships, because only collectively can we really change the face of this nation.
Kalyan, any thoughts on systemizing,
Well,
not standardizing?
So I agree with Chavi when she said there is a lot of space for every kind of a stakeholder, be it the private companies or the government or people. Well, at Proto Village, what we are doing is we are creating the prototypes of various possible enterprises at a very, very micro scale in each of the 9 dimensions. So, for example, in food security, we are working on creating an aquaponic system, which is a prototype of a community-driven aquaponic system. Similarly, there are n number of opportunities in each and every dimension. These are basic needs, so there will be a huge amount of demand, so to speak. So that said, there is a huge space for private companies to partner with people. And I also agree with another point that she said, which is about the need to blend in to the village. It's very difficult for a stranger to start working in a village. It took me like 3 years, and I can now confidently say that there are about 40% of the people who think I'm a good guy, a reasonably good guy. And I mean that I may be overestimating. So it's very difficult to get into a village and start doing it. So I think, all this said, I always want to get back to that first principle of mine, which is the place is more important than people, more important than penny. Any enterprise, private or public, whatever, that wants to get into a village and start an enterprise or take its enterprise into a village should consider 3 things. One is the ecological sustainability, how it affects the local ecology. Second thing is cultural, whether the enterprise is going to be culturally appropriate or not. And third, obviously, a company is good at doing with the economic viability studies. So given that, if it ranks high on all the 3, then the world is everybody's, so it's everyone's space.
Great.
So there was a question on the individualism versus the community, sense of community, and how, if we scale in, won't that be contradictory? By scaling in, what I meant is not to become selfish. I mean, selfish in a certain perspective, yes, but by scaling in, what I really meant was understanding our responsibility as being to evolve a lifestyle that contributes continuously to the perpetuation of life around us. So as long as we understand that as a responsibility and work towards it, even at scaling in, it obviously leads us to build a community together. So scaling in doesn't necessarily isolate you, it actually builds a community around you.
It is evidently apparent that none of the models can succeed unless we involve the key stakeholders, be they the villagers in the village areas, or communities in urban areas, or like slum dwellers in slum areas. But the key stakeholders, even as we term them as key stakeholders, this key is often left unused. So how do we ensure that the key is actually used and the potential is tapped by opening this lock? We end up like lambasting government, or maybe looking forward to individual charity, be it one odd bureaucrat or one odd leader. So how can is there could there be a mechanism through which these models can be actually made fruitful by involving the key of various stakeholders, which is what I guess it would take for these models to succeed eventually? That's my question to anyone who can answer.
Just a quick line about what I've been doing for the last 2 years. I've been a teacher in a low-income school. I worked with Teach for India, and now I'm a program manager, so I train other teachers now to work. And I just feel like one of the common narratives that came out through what everyone was saying was just children, education, and how that builds sustainability in everything. And I think that there are a couple of other fellowships as well that work very closely with youth, and just using sort of youth and putting them into developmentally difficult situations, Teacher India being one of them. And I just feel like I mean, it's not as much a question as it is an invitation for partnerships. I just can't imagine like how exciting and how interesting it would be if like some of my fellows come to you for internships and things like that. So I just want to create that kind of network and partnerships.
Just give you an example of one problem, the flood problem. Okay, do you know how many departments are involved in actually controlling the flood or managing the flood in a city? You'll be surprised. Maybe stormwater systems, health department, then what is that, the sewerage department, then irrigation department, disaster management authority at the state level. This many people are, but do you know they never talk to each other? Creating a platform is the first step to take. Surat, we worked 5 years, we created something called a city advisory committee. Means anybody is welcome. So it is just what is that? 15-20 people sitting down at least once in a month and discussing. And it took nearly 1 year to turn it around into a formal body called Surat Climate Change Trust, which basically now has members from industry, university, engineering college, irrigation department, IMD's representative, State Disaster Management Authority, Center for Social Sciences, which is one of the people who are doing this research on social issues. Private sector, as I talked about, like Diamond and this merchants over their state, what is that, South Gujarat Chamber of Commerce and Industry, to bring the people to even to reach a common, even in one, at least talking to each other, that level it nearly takes 1 hour, 1 year. And that persistence is required to do any changes which was talked about, the systemic changes. It's unless we create such platforms, nothing can be.
Probably institutionally, some kind of horizontal, what do you call it, integration across departments and systems is something that needs to be promoted by the planning bodies of the government, right, from top to the bottom.
It has to start at the city level. You close your eyes and you look into all the policies. How many actually go down? Nothing. Okay, we have got what is that, CPHUO norms, which is 135 LPCD. We have Faridabad example, which is 185, but actually poor do not get water. Okay, that's a problem. Unless something happens at the ground level, I don't think policies or anything will change.
I'd just like to add, I think it's also a question of a willingness of letting go. And I've seen leaders, be it politicians or bureaucrats, they all have this fear, and you get to see it really up close and personal when you're working at the grassroots, is that they think that if we empower people, who's going to, their fear is that they're going to stop coming to them. Ki hame poochne kaun aayega? And this is something I've heard from both the bodies saying it. Now, if that is the kind of vision and that's the idea they have, how are we going to progress? And just the other thing I'd like to say to that, of course, Mr. Bhat already said, that dialogues, of course, make a huge difference. When we're speaking of the larger number, again, when somebody's trying to initiate a dialogue in a platform like this, we're all used to talking. Like I just said, I'm going to say what I have to say and I will speak up. But for somebody who's not used to it, takes a while. And it has to be, there's a little bit of nudging that's required, but you need to ensure that you're not dictating it. You just need to nudge the person, give a little bit of moral support, and have him or her speak up. And as people start speaking, it's just that first bit that there's a bit of a hitch. But once that happens, once the dialogue starts, everybody chips in. And as I said when I shared the work we've done in the village, when somebody speaks up, not just about the problem, but also about the solution. There's a certain element of ownership that comes in instantly. So when the project is executed or implemented, the person will ensure that he or she is there actually supervising, even if not proactively participating, but they will be there to supervise because they think it is their idea and therefore they have a sense of responsibility towards it. So if we can inculcate that habit, then we will be able to unlock those locks and use and tap the keys exactly the way they ought to be tapped.
Great. I will have to close, but cannot without the last words from the speakers. If Chaitanya, I can ask you to add a couple of points really on the returns that your investors are getting, and how are you building that relationship that will help you up, I suppose.
Absolutely. So I think we do 6,400 plus and growing family of social investors. We've had the repayment record is something that even banks would be delighted to see. And essentially what it comes down to is what we said, a lot of others have said, that people don't need to be spoon-fed. If you give them the opportunity, if you give them the inputs, a lot of our people have the ability to stand up on their own feet and do what they think is right to be done. We don't come with, we don't give them a loan and then follow it up with saying you will use it for this or you will use it for that and stuff like that. Secondly, a lot of our institutions have actually failed our poor, whether it's education or health or financial services or whatever. And what we're really trying to see is we need to create products that matter to people. If that's the reason why I gave 2 or 3 examples. What works for a rickshaw puller will not work for somebody else. The loan that I need to, an income generation loan, cannot be charged at the same interest as an education loan, which is what almost all MFIs do. And it is ridiculous to say that you have to pay the same level of interest for something as let's say sanitation or education, which has a much longer term. This thing does not generate any income. So I think that's an important thing for us to realize, that people, given right inputs and given the right kind of empowering inputs, there's a lot that our people can do. And in fact, some of the people are actually confident enough. In fact, just met a few groups that said, I don't need another loan. And MFI would have, they would have been shocked, saying, why don't they ask for another loan? For us, it was actually a delight for people to say, I don't need another loan, because it means we've taken them to a stage where they think they're self-sufficient. And I think that's an important thing. For social investors, people, basically what this platform does is an opportunity to connect. Most of our institutions are opaque, they don't allow people to connect, and that's the problem in terms of trying to get people together. The sense of community that at different levels we're talking about, we're just trying to create in a different way for a different purpose.
Kriti, what elements of your model, are all elements of your model the same level, or is it one that can drive the others?
So this depends a lot on the diversity, on the specific geographic location that we are in. There are places where finance is not that much of a problem, so you concentrate on the others. There are places where demand isn't that much of a problem, so it's really easy to tie the rest together. So it's a very specific condition that you need to deal with on the field. It's easier, for example, to get material up and going because something like fly ash is now taking up in a lot of parts of the country. To get loans at the absolute rural village level then becomes the bigger challenge. So it keeps varying. When we work in different locations, it depends on what the strength of our partners. Accordingly, the other parts of the model then get strengthened.
The thing about Safai Sena is that they, even before we came in, they were picking trash and they were filling their stomach. Of course, it wasn't Safai Sena. So the idea of coming together is kind of to get voice, but also to scale up your work and take bigger contracts. I mean, how would 3 people handle, the New Delhi railway station? So all I'm saying is that 2 things occur to me when I look at Safai Sena. That why do we assume that they need any other help apart from enabling them to just go further and further? They have a robust business model. They're making money. They're going ahead. So I think that is my number 1 thought, that there is something that's working. Why do we have to constantly kill it the way we are breaking down informal sector in multiple ways that I didn't talk about.
And I realized that if I worked on that and I chose people who I thought would be ideal for the post, it could lead to a certain disharmony within the village. So I chose not to take that route. But what I've done is, again, speaking of children, including the youth and women, what I do is, whatever I've learned in these 4.5 years, I share that information with them. And of course, men are always welcome. What I do is share information about what the budget allocations are, what the different schemes are, basically create a sense of awareness, and that should also answer the question about tapping the key. Because I feel that villages are made aware of what exists out there, not in terms of what they have a right to, because often I've seen people speak about rights, but they do not talk about responsibility. And unless until the two of them are not clubbed together, everything's going to be such a whitewash. And therefore, I'd speak about the awareness, because I believe that irrespective of what kind of people, what kind of team gets elected, if people know what money lies out there, what kind of schemes lie out there, what they can benefit from, they will automatically start demanding it of the people who are out there. Because once you start demanding, things do fall in place. So that is what I'm trying to work around. And also we're creating a structure where there's greater transparency and accountability, at least within our council, wherein we've, not that it's happened in a very big way, because we still have a very old building. Once we construct our new office, then we're going to have a specific information center so that every project that is executed, how much money was sanctioned, how much was spent, how much of it was underutilized or overutilized, all of that information is going to be put up in the Panchayat office. And I'm expecting the youth to ensure that that process is carried on even after my tenure ends as a Sarpanch. And of course, the other thing that I want to do is try and scale that aspect, scale it up, starting with not just my village, but neighboring villages also. Right now I don't do it because I'm seen as a politician, and which tends to lead to a lot of insecurity. So I don't go out of my way, but people know that if they ever need help, they can come to me. So I have a lot of other Sarpanches who come to me, a lot of Sarpanches from other states who call me ever so often, and we share ideas to try and understand what can we do collectively, and what the system has in place that they do not know about that they can benefit from. So I think if that awareness is brought up, because the biggest issue in India, not just grassroots, but even the urban sector, the problem is that we don't know what exists out there. And as Sir also pointed out, there are multiple departments who, because of the overlap, are refusing to take responsibility. So how do we ensure that that is uncluttered? So I think once that happens and people start questioning and demanding, things will fall in place.
Okay. Thank you very much. But before you leave, we have 3 more minutes. I ask you to be here. There are experiences like these and many others that we are mapping on the national map. We are trying to connect the dots, and we hope that you would be able to map your experiences and your programs as well. This is just a 2-minute presentation. Not more than 2 minutes, Mandira? Yeah.